if you think about stable coins in the digital economy. But let me just focus on stable coins first, if your question, and we can zoom out to that. So I think currently we're in a phase where there's just a lot of inertia. So we've got dollar as the reserve currency in what I would call the real world. And so a lot of that's just kind of carrying over into the digital space, in the blockchain space. And I think that explains a lot of why US dollar stablecoins are so dominant. I don't think that's going to last forever. I think that's, we can ride that inertia for a little bit, but fundamentally, like, what makes a currency influential in the long term? It's got to be trusted and it's got to be used.
Yeah.
And those are related, right? It's going to get used if it's trusted, and if it's trusted, it gets used. And so for trade and finance and reserves, that's the story, right? The reason why the dollar is so trusted and used is because we've got strong rule of law here in America, and we've got a strong economy. And so those things kind of feed each other.
Others was like the rise of other CBDCs. So I do work in the US. We work with the Fed, and we work with the academic, a number of universities that also work with the Fed. And
well, so when XRP was created, this actually was created before Ripple existed. The creators of XRP decided there'd be 100 billion units because they saw it as rather than having a smaller number with a very high price, they saw it as something they wanted to be effectively a global reserve currency.
So let's just sort of think about this. You've got a bunch of different tokenization systems, and you want, ideally, you do want different countries, you want global commerce. Wouldn't you need a central bank, sort of one central, not necessarily reserve, well, sort of like a reserve currency where everybody could exchange their tokenized assets and trade them? Wouldn't that require one central bank currency to sort of settle all that out? That one that everybody recognizes and respects?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the benefits of tokenization depend on there being a settlement asset, right? And some people say that stablecoins should be a settlement asset. I think that is a terrible reason because of all the fragilities of stablecoins that I've testified about before. So I really think that the settlement asset has to be some kind of central bank money, ultimately.
All right.
And if you want that on the ledger, it's probably going to have to take the form of some kind of central bank digital currency. Now, this doesn't have to be a retail product, and I want to emphasize that because I'm not sure where I sit on retail central bank digital currencies, but a wholesale, the plumbing, central bank digital currencies, something like that would be needed as a settlement.
But obviously, if the Federal Reserve Bank is not allowed to operate in that space, it's going to be a central bank, some other central bank. It won't be ours. It'll be EU or China or some other central bank that'll be the settlement, the central bank currency of choice.
Yeah.
Now, rising above that, we have some international reserve currencies. So you have reserve currencies that are also recognized as assets by multiple countries. There are several of those. And so for a transaction to take place from country A to country B, it's not just a matter of two currencies sort of coming together. It's a matter of exchanging from the originating currency into a reserve or a recognized international currency and then back out again. And this is primarily true in developing markets. In developed markets where the country's currency happens to be a reserve currency, well, there's essentially only one exchange that takes place, or the recipient is willing to accept the reserve currency. In the digital world, the question that you asked is quite pertinent. In the digital world, with two countries having a central bank issued digital instrument, how does that exchange happen? Now, the way we see it is that for that exchange to happen in an efficient way, number one, central banks have to participate. So this is not an exercise with just the private sector trying to make this happen. The bilateral nature of two central banks that are in the payment flow have to participate because they become ballast basically underwriting their own currency on what we call, or what we would think about as, an international cross-border bus. Once they are the ballots on this cross-border bus, private sector participants can participate because they're essentially regulated by their in-country central bank, and the rules of the road are pretty well defined. And so there can be a direct connection between private sector participants in country A and private sector participants in country B. In the middle, there has to be an automated mechanism for the exchange to take place, meaning country A's originating currency gets converted into an exchange currency, and country B then subsequently turns it back into the local currency. And this whole process can be automated as long as the security boundaries of the bus are secured, so that the liquidity or the transaction within the bus can be ensured. Exchange from A to B, A to common currency back to B can take place. The participation of the central banks is what provides the ballast on this bus. Once central banks are participating, the ability to execute from a CBDC in country A back to a CBDC in country B becomes eminently doable. The technology then that allows this to happen has to be essentially adopted by the central banks. And this is what e-currency focuses on, is to really allow central banks to get up to par on the technology, such that the private sector participants, whether that be commercial banks, e-money operators, payment service providers, or even new entrants like some of my colleagues are, can then participate on it to allow for this cross-border thing to happen. I want to go back to the original point I made when I spoke earlier, which is eliminating the risk components, the settlement risk component, the counterparty risk component, and ultimately reducing the amount of liquidity needed to execute a cross-border transaction is what will bring the cost of cross-border transactions down and the risks associated with cross-border transactions down. So that's what we try to enable.
I want you to think about this report in two ways. First of all, it's just a wake-up call for central bankers that we are going to live during the green transition in an environment where necessarily there is going to be pressure towards higher inflation. Because we are going to live in a world where there are going to be a series of supply negative shocks that are going to push up the Phillips curve. And in an environment where there is going to be more volatile inflation. Now, how to respond to that? Well, in part, this inflation is necessary for the transformation. And so, first thing is that we have to be aware of the fact that if we are going to fight inflation very harsh, there are going to be much larger drop in activity cost in terms of employment than in normal times.
Joining the team here, our work on Phoenix, which continues to be in kind of alpha/beta, and